As probably introduced, my name is Johanna, and I am currently employed, as you said, the Chief Compliance Officer at Sörmlands Sparbank. The topic that I will talk to you about today is the role of compliance and risk governance to detect fraud across the financial industry. And during this presentation, I will walk you through from my point of view, the solution, the problem, as well as the question. So let's begin. You can go to the next picture, which kind of outlines the compliance framework, which is the key or the solution to detect irregularities as well as financial crime, including fraud. With a sound risk culture and policies in place, the employees of a financial institution will have the tools to detect, to report, and even in some extent combat financial crime. The framework is then supposed to create the frame of business conduct, and the risk culture forms the ground base, which then should be part of all day-to-day activities. I mean, a sound and consistent risk culture should always be a key element of any institution's effective risk management and should enable institutions to make sound and informed decisions. Risk control and compliance, we both constitute the second line of defense in terms of risk management. And in that role, there is a certain level of independency included, and the element of control is of course a large part of the daily tasks, hence the expression control function. In regards to compliance and risk governance, there has been a shift in what main approach is to be preferred. And my view in this is that compliance will not be at its best if the compliance or risk control function is found on an independent pedestal, only performing reviews and telling senior management on what they've done wrong. Instead, I feel that the key to successful compliance framework is, in my opinion, to take a proactive approach within the frames of legal requirements, of course, taking into account the requirements of independency. This is, however, not a question of either or. A combination of both approaches will be required. But however, in relation to senior management, there is most often a demand for proactive support so that the business operation can do right the first time around instead of being detected in any kind of follow-ups or controls. To manage this, it is crucial to have a compliance plan or a risk control plan, which takes into account all kinds of compliance risks, including the risks of fraud and other financial crime. And in addition to this, it is necessary to invite compliance and risk to discussions with senior management, to the board of directors, and so forward. Then I included one of the topics that goes close to my heart. I mean, tone at the top is a sentence I'm guessing most of you are quite familiar with. And this is not only a figure of speech, because success in compliance and risk governance starts with the board and senior management, sometimes even with the directives from owners of the respective company or financial institution. But tone at the top side, you should never underestimate the proper implementation of the framework and detailed routines. This will, of course, require resources as well as an inconsistent risk culture, which I mentioned in the beginning. And the risk behavior that is requested by the top, and also it could also include punishment of unwanted behavior. But without enough resources and proper implementation, you will most likely have gaps in your compliance framework, and these gaps will cause you unwanted behaviors. The gaps could be most often not having to been able to kind of inform everyone about the compliance framework, but it could also be in the middle management. And then you have to kind of realize that both middle management and the business is both equally important for the compliance framework success. But as I said, most organizations and financial institutions will realize that they have gaps somewhere in the framework. And the best way, in my opinion, to close potential gaps is through educations as well as follow-ups. And I'm guessing you have all launched education programs with a one-time education. Everyone in the company participates, and manual alerts and questions quickly rise, which will give you as a compliance, the risk, or HR happy. However, after a time has passed and other daily activities and company goals intrude, a reminder will most often be needed to put a question to the top of the mind for each and everyone involved in the detection of financial crime, which is, in my opinion, almost everyone employed in the financial institution in one way or another. It's not only the ones who's facing customers or managing the monitoring systems. Compliance and risk control will have to be integrated in these kind of discussions as well. And one way to kind of keep on engaging your coworkers in detecting financial crimes and frauds is by creating systems of manual alerts to complement your systems and monitoring systems. This allows for communication by and to your fellow coworkers. The manual alerts will then give compliance a risk a good input on what is happening in the relations closest to the customers. And one thing to remember here, and a thing you should never underestimate, is the value of feedback to the persons triggering the manual alerts, because feedback in all ways evolve your coworkers, and it will learn them to improve their, and in the longer run, your own work. So without the proper implementation, education programs with follow-ups, involvement of the employees, and feedback, it will make no difference how good the outer framework is in terms of policies, instructions, and so on, because the prevention of irregularities and fraud would in such case be unsuccessful. But apart from the compliance framework, we have the question on who sets the agenda. And this is, according to me, the problem, which is presented on the next slide. Thank you. It's not the authorities who sets the agenda. It's not the employees, and it's not even the board of management, because the criminals do. And with constant changes in modus and operation, it is difficult and nearly, impossible to keep up. We initially heard from Ossie at NICE, who spoke about techniques and the use of dark web, which I'm guessing scared some of you, including myself, because new ways of operations for the criminals demands for new techniques in order to be able to detect fraud and financial crime. We heard mentioning artificial intelligence and blockchain, and you will get more introduction to that later on. And for me, a few years ago, this was only kind of words and for the IT and tech departments to take care of, but it will have to be included as part of the compliance framework in the future if it isn't already. I have participated in several seminars and webinars where my peers have believed that this will not be something that we will need to learn. As I said, the areas has most often been directed to IT to develop. But the problem will in such case be that the compliance and risk perspective in how to best prevent fraud will not be taken into account, and it will create one of these gaps in the compliance framework, as I mentioned before. So expertise within information security and new techniques will be required both from compliance officers and risk managers in the future if it isn't already. Together with the business and with your fellow coworkers, you need to kind of sit down, have workshops, and I promise it is possible to arrange for it digitally nowadays. Everyone is getting more used to Zoom, breakout rooms, Teams, and so forward. And we need to kind of together analyze the metrics of the current monitoring systems. And if possible, the use of real-time data should be in the fullest extent possible, because then we will together be able to create new and relevant scenarios to detect fraudsters and financial crimes. And for some financials, this is yet to be implemented or even invented. we have here in Sweden had several cases during the last year where larger banks who have not fully evolved the monitoring systems and processes in relation to new use of techniques, or even old uses of techniques for that matter, in order to detect financial crime in general, but money laundering then in particular. And that cost them billions of Swedish krona in sanctions, and also big hits to the reputation of, resulting in lowered value on the stock exchange and turn on the brand with the customers. And this is, as I said, it is a very complex question. And since we are not able to kind of control the agenda, we need to keep up and have the solid governance and the compliance framework in place to do the best we can do. Then I want to finalize with a question, which is the question of fraud detection only for the financial industry? Can we combat fraud, risk, and compliance governance? Most likely not. There is only so much we can do, and the framework allows us to detect suspicious activities and irregularities, giving us the possibility to report this to any authority applicable. But I do believe that to be done. The financial institution has always been kind of on the front end together with the developers of the system to kind of counter financial crime and detecting fraud. But the financial industry, we will need to be able to share the information between the financial institutions, and the authorities will also need better to kind of combat the financial crime, both in a local perspective as well as in an international perspective. And that will have to be done on their end of this. However, I do believe that with a sound risk culture and a well-established compliance framework with the use of new techniques and evaluation of scenarios and monitoring, the financial industry can do a lot in the system of detecting fraud across the financial industry. And that was, yeah, the question is on the last slide. Thank you. That was kind of what I was going to go through in relation to the role of compliance and risk governance to detect fraud across the financial industry. And if any questions, please direct them directly in the Q&A section